There's a record called Come to My House that two of the most important voices in American music made together. A full album, start to finish. One of them is the woman a whole lot of people will tell you is the greatest singer of her generation. The other one is, well, he's Prince. And when this album came out on July 21st, 1998, it more or less vanished. No big hit single, no award show moment. Most folks who love both of these artists have never even heard it. So tonight I want to walk you through how that happened. How Chaka Khan and Prince ended up in a studio out in Minnesota making a whole album together, and why almost nobody got to hear the result. Because here's the thing, this is not a story about two strangers who got thrown into a room by a record company. This is a friendship, a real one. A bond between two artists that goes back more than 20 years before this album was ever made. And to really understand this record, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. So let's rewind. First, though, you need to understand who these two people actually were. Because if you only know Prince from Purple Rain and you only know Chaka Khan from a couple of her hits on the radio, then you're missing more than half of this story. Let's start with Chaka. She was born Yvette Marie Stevens on the south side of Chicago in 1953, and from the very beginning she refused to fit inside any box anyone tried to put her in. By the time she was 16, she'd left home, dropped out of high school, and changed her name. And she could sing. Oh, could she sing? As a young woman, she became the lead voice of a Chicago funk band called Rufus. And the moment that changed everything came when Stevie Wonder himself walked into their sessions and handed them a song he'd written called Tell Me Something Good. That song shot to number 3 on the pop charts in 1974 and won the band their first Grammy. The hits kept coming. Sweet Thing, Ain't Nobody, and then she stepped out on her own, and her very first solo single, I'm Every Woman, went to number 1 on the Rhythm and Blues chart. They started calling her the Queen of Funk. And the title fit. Funk, soul, jazz, gospel, pop, she could do all of it, at a level almost nobody else on earth could touch. By the middle of the 1970s, Chaka Khan was already a legend in the making. Keep that firmly in mind because it matters enormously for what comes next. Now let's meet the other one. The year is 1977, and out in Sausalito, California, at a studio called The Record Plant, there's a young kid from Minneapolis recording his very first album. He's not even out of his teens. No fame, no fortune, no purple anything. That kid is Prince, and the album is called For You. And here's the detail that tells you everything. On that record, he didn't just sing. He played nearly every single instrument himself. The guitars, the keyboards, the bass, the drums. He produced it. He arranged it. A teenager who walked into a professional studio and basically said, I don't need a band. I am the band. He was a one-man musical universe before the world had any idea who he was, and he was working in that very same building as Chaka Khan, who by this point was already a star. So you've got these two people under one roof. One of them is a star, the other is a nobody who happens to be a once-in-a-generation genius. And the genius was a huge fan of the star. Prince had grown up on her music, on the funk and soul that Chaka was putting out into the world. So when he realized she was right there in the same studio, he wanted to meet her. There was just one problem. He was painfully, almost cripplingly shy. So what does a shy young genius do when he's too nervous to walk up and introduce himself to one of his heroes? He gets creative. He gets on the telephone, calls her hotel room, and pretends to be somebody else. Specifically, he imitates the voice of Sly Stone, the funk legend who happened to be recording in the same area. So Chaka picks up the phone, thinks she's talking to Sly Stone, and this voice lures her down to the studio. And when she gets there, looking for Sly, what she finds instead is this quiet young kid. That's how they met. A prank phone call from a teenager who would go on to change the face of popular music forever. And the way Prince told it years later, once they were actually face to face, he couldn't even speak. He was so completely in awe of her that the words wouldn't come out. So instead of talking, he just played for her. She listened for a little while, and then she went on her way. That was the whole encounter. But think about what that moment really was. This wasn't two equals meeting as peers. This was a young genius getting his first audience with one of the artists he worshipped. Keep that image in your back pocket, because it explains so much about what comes later. It would take more than 20 years for the two of them to finally stand side by side as true partners. Now you might be thinking, hold on, I know these two are connected somehow, and you'd be right, because the connection comes down to one song. A couple of years after that shy first meeting, Prince wrote a song and recorded it himself on his self-titled album in 1979. The song did fine. It didn't set the world on fire. The song was called I Feel For You, and then 1984 arrived, and everything changed. Chaka Khan took that same song, that quiet Prince album track, and completely transformed it. She brought in the rapper Melle Mel to open the whole thing with that now iconic introduction, the one where he stutters and stammers her name at the top over and over until it's practically burned into your brain. She brought in Stevie Wonder to play that unforgettable harmonica line. And behind the desk was the legendary producer Arif Mardin, who knew exactly how to frame her voice and make every wild piece of it land. And the result was a monster, an absolute smash. It climbed to number 3 on the pop charts and sat there for half a year. Number 1 on the rhythm and blues side, a hit across the Atlantic. Over 1 million copies sold. And it did something almost nobody had done before. By putting that rap right at the front of a pop and soul record, it became one of the very first mainstream songs to fuse hip-hop and rhythm and blues together and ride it to the top. It opened a door 1,000 artists would walk through, and it won 2 Grammy Awards. One went to Chaka Khan for her vocal, and one went to Prince as the writer of the song. Now sit with what that means, because it's the key to everything. Prince wrote that song, and on his own, it was just a nice album track. But when Chaka Khan got hold of it, she lifted it into the stratosphere. That right there is the chemistry we're talking about. He provides the blueprint, the bones of the thing, and she provides the soul, the fire, the human heartbeat that makes 1 million people fall in love with it. And just so you know this isn't ancient history the world has forgotten, let me tell you something remarkable. In the year 2026, more than 4 decades after it came out, Chaka Khan's recording of I Feel For You was selected for the National Recording Registry at the Library of Congress. That's the United States government essentially declaring that a recording is so important it must be preserved forever. More than 40 years on, and people are still bowing down to it. And here's the thing about that. The I Feel For You story was not a one-off. Prince was so impossibly prolific that he gave away brilliant songs to other artists all the time. You've heard plenty of his songs over the years sung by other people, big hits, without ever realizing he wrote them. And meanwhile, his own star exploded. That shy kid from the record plant became by 1984, with the album and the film Purple Rain, arguably the single most exciting artist on the face of the earth. So this is who we're really talking about, a generational genius who wrote hits in his sleep. And the fact that he kept coming back to Chaka again and again tells you everything about how much he revered her voice. Because he did keep coming back. All through the 80s and into the 90s, Prince kept handing Chaka music. In 1988, he wrote her a track called Sticky Wicked and brought in the jazz legend Miles Davis to play trumpet on it. He gave her a song called Eternity. A little later, the two of them worked on a track called Pain. Over and over, this man wrote for this woman. But here's what they had never done. In all those years, all those songs, they had never sat down and made one complete album together, just the two of them, start to finish. So why did that finally change? To understand that, you have to understand that in the middle of the 1990s, both of these artists were fighting the exact same battle against the exact same enemy, their record label Warner Brothers. Chaka's side was simpler. She'd poured herself into a new album with sessions stretching across 1993 to 95, and the label shelved it, postponed it, then basically killed it. Imagine doing some of the best work of your life and being told it'll never be heard. She felt neglected, invisible, like the company that was supposed to champion her had stopped fighting for her. So in 1996, she walked away from Warner Brothers entirely. Now guess who else was at war with Warner Brothers at the exact same time? That's right, Prince. and his battle was one of the most public feuds in the entire history of the music business. The man was almost supernaturally prolific. Songs poured out of him faster than any record label on earth could release them, and Warner wanted a slow, careful, measured schedule, but it went even deeper than that. At the core of it was the question of ownership. The label owned his master recordings, and they even maintained that they owned his very name. So in 1993, he did something that left the whole world scratching its head. He changed his name, not to another name, but to a symbol, an unpronounceable symbol you couldn't even type on a keyboard or say out loud. The press started calling him the artist formerly known as Prince, and because the symbol couldn't be printed, his team literally mailed floppy disks to magazines containing the image just so they'd have something to use. And he started appearing in public with a single word written on his cheek. The word was slave. A lot of people criticized him for it. Here was a man with a contract reportedly worth around $100 million calling himself a slave. But to Prince, the money was beside the point. This was about principle. An artist should own his own work, his own name, his own future. So he delivered the albums his contract required, worked off his obligations, and in 1996, finally, he was a free man. And the first thing he did with that freedom was make a statement, a huge one, a triple album, 36 brand new songs that he gave the perfect title. He called it Emancipation, because that's exactly what it was, the sound of a man breaking his chains. And he put it out on his own record label, a label he'd founded back in 1993 for exactly this kind of moment. That label was called NPG Records, the New Power Generation. Prince declared Emancipation the most important record of his life. I'm free, he was saying, and now my music is free too. So now picture the whole situation. Two artists who've known each other for 20 years, both of them have just clawed their way out from under the same record company, both of them are finally free, and one of them now owns his own label and a studio out in Minnesota called Paisley Park, a sprawling creative compound where he could write a song, record it, film a video for it, and never have to leave the building. A fortress where the outside world and all its record company executives couldn't reach him. And Prince did something beautiful with that freedom. He decided to use his label and his studio to lift up the artists he'd grown up worshiping. Two of them sat right at the top of his list. The first was a man named Larry Graham, the bass player from Sly and the Family Stone, widely credited as the man who basically invented the slapping, popping style of bass that runs through the DNA of funk itself. To a young Prince in Minneapolis, Larry Graham was a god. And the second one was Chaka Khan, the hero from that hotel room back in 1977. So Prince brought her out to Paisley Park and in effect said to her, "Let's finally make that album. The thing we've never done in all these years. Let's make it now." And the way they made it tells you everything about how in tune these two had become. They knocked out the heart of this entire album in a matter of weeks. Chaka would come in with her words, her lyrics, her poetry, and Prince would build entire worlds of music around them, sometimes working through the night while she slept, so that when she woke up, there'd be a brand new track waiting for her to sing. He played most of the instruments himself, just like on that very first album back in 1977. But this time, something was different. For the first time in her entire career, Chaka Khan was not just the singer on her own album. She got a producer credit. She was finally in the control room, helping shape the whole thing from the ground up. And she wrote or co-wrote 10 of the 13 songs. For an artist who'd spent most of her career singing songs other people wrote for her, that was a revolution. She wasn't just the voice anymore. She was the author, and the two of them even agreed to split everything right down the middle. 50-50, true equals, true partners. From a shy kid too in awe to speak, to a full and equal creative partnership. That is the arc of this entire story right there in one decision. And think about what those sessions must have felt like. Both of them had just escaped record companies that made them feel controlled and neglected. Now here they were at Paisley Park in the middle of the Minnesota nights, with no executives looking over their shoulders, no marketing department, no clock ticking, no rules at all, just two old friends and a room full of instruments and all the freedom in the world. You can almost hear that joy in the music itself. This was not a record made under pressure. It was a celebration of freedom. So what's actually on it? It opens with the title track, and right away you understand what kind of album this is going to be. It's an invitation. Chaka's voice comes soaring in, warm and gracious, welcoming you, offering you a drink, making you feel at home, all wrapped in Prince's smooth, glossy production. And from there, the record ranges incredibly wide. There's an autobiographical song where Chaka looks back on the wild, winding journey of her own life. There's a funk workout with a guest rap dropped right into the middle of it by none other than Queen Latifah. There's a bold, defiant anthem of self-respect, all about a grown woman who's learned her worth and refuses to settle for a man who doesn't deserve her. There's a serious political song taking on the state of the world. There are tender ballads, gospel touches, and a cover that nods to Larry Graham, the other hero in this whole story, woven right into the album. And running underneath all of it is Prince's production, which is one of the great pleasures of this record. Lush, deep, layered, with funk flourishes tucked into every corner and his fingerprints all over the whole thing, even though his specific parts aren't even spelled out in the credits. And floating on top of all that, you have Chaka's voice, pure feeling, pure soul, running the full range of everything she can do. The critics who actually heard this album understood exactly what they were holding. They praised its variety, its maturity, its ambition. This was the sound of two great artists in the fullness of their powers, making something intimate and rich and grown up. This was not a record chasing a hit. This was a record made by people who had nothing left to prove and everything left to say. And notice this, when Chaka Khan finally got to write her own album, what did she choose to say? She wrote about her own life, about self-respect, about the state of the world, about love, about the spiritual, the personal, and the political, all at once. This is the closest thing we have to Chaka Khan telling her own story, in her own words, at the height of her powers. But I have to flag something for you carefully because it's part of why I want you to stick with this series. A couple of the songs on this album are not quite what they seem. Some of them have hidden lives, secret origins, pasts that stretch back years before Chaka Khan ever sang a note on them. Tuck that thought away, because that, my friends, is a story for the next part. So by every logic in the world, this should have been an event. Two newly liberated legends, both at the top of their game, joining forces. This should have been everywhere. So why are we sitting here all these years later and most music fans have no idea this album even exists? Why did it vanish? Here's the hard truth, and it comes right out of the very freedom that made the album possible. When you leave the big record company, you also leave behind the big record company machine. And that machine, as controlling as it was, is also enormously powerful. It's the thing that puts your music on the radio, buys the billboards, pushes your album into every store in the country. When Prince broke free, he gained his artistic freedom, but he gave up that promotional muscle, and so did Chaka. So Come to My House came out on Prince's own independent label, NPG Records, distributed through BMG, and there's a detail that made it even harder. By some accounts, the album was originally meant to come out through a bigger arrangement, reportedly tied to Arista Records, but those plans fell through, and when that bigger deal collapsed, the promotion behind the album suffered badly. No radio campaign, no billboards, it came out quietly, without the machine. The singles came and went without ever charting, and the album made only the briefest appearance on Billboard's Rhythm and Blues chart, peaking at number 49 before slipping away. For a Prince and Chaka Khan album, that was a quiet, painful disappointment. Not because the music was bad, far from it, because almost nobody got the chance to hear it. There was an effort, to be fair. That summer, Prince mounted a tour, a whole live showcase he called the New Power Soul Festival Tour. He put himself, Chaka Khan, and Larry Graham all up on the same stage together, three generations of funk royalty in one night, performing across the United States and Europe to promote their trio of new albums. And during those shows, Prince and Chaka would often perform I Feel For You together, the song that had bound them for nearly 15 years. But even a tour like that couldn't fully make up for the absence of that great promotional machine. But here, finally, is the part that makes this whole story worth telling. Because the people who did find this record, the critics, the deep fans, the musicians, a great many of them came away saying the very same thing. They said this might be one of the most overlooked records that either of these two artists ever made. A hidden gem, a lost treasure, a genuine classic that the world simply walked right past. And then came the tragedy that changed everything. When Prince passed away in April of 2016, the entire world went searching back through everything he had ever touched. And in the course of all that rediscovery, a lot of listeners stumbled onto this little album that almost nobody had bought back in 1998. And they started to realize what they had missed. The album that vanished started, slowly, to come back to life. There's a bitter poetry in that it took losing him for so many people to discover the gift he had made for his hero. But discover it they did, and every year a few more people stumble onto it, fall in love with it, and ask the same question: how did I never hear this? How did the world let this one slip away? So that is where this part of the story comes to rest. Two old friends, both wounded by the music business, both finally free of it, coming together after 20 years to make a beautiful, ambitious, deeply personal record, a record that almost nobody heard when it came out. A lost gem sitting in the dark, waiting. But the album itself is only half of this mystery, maybe even less than half, because when you actually get inside those sessions at Paisley Park, you start to find some strange and fascinating things. You find songs on this album that are older than the album itself, songs that didn't come from those 2 weeks of sessions at all, but from somewhere else entirely. Songs that came out of a locked vault in the basement of Paisley Park. Music that Prince had been sitting on, holding back, keeping hidden for years before Chaka ever stepped up to the microphone to sing them. And then there's the even bigger question, the one that hangs over this entire story. Because in recent years, Chaka Khan herself has started to hint at something. She has suggested that the two of them made far more music together than what ended up on this one record. She has spoken about songs that, to this very day, have never been released. Songs that may still be sitting somewhere, locked away, unheard. The missing tracks. How many of them are there? Where are they now? What's on them? And will the world ever get to hear them? That is exactly where we are headed next. We're going to go inside those sessions. We're going to go inside the vault. And we're going to dig into the real mystery at the heart of this whole story, the mystery of the missing tracks that Prince produced for Chaka Khan. So make sure you're following along, because in the next part, this story gets a whole lot deeper.